Hello. I know it's been a lot longer than I wanted for posting a video on this channel, but with so much information about artificial intelligence being all over the place, it's been difficult picking and choosing what topics to talk about. Specifically with code development also being quite aggressive, it's added to the challenges. So let's get into what I want to talk about today, which is disturbing for a lot of different reasons because there's just a lot of problems that aren't being discussed with the actual real problem. And that is Meta pirating trillions of gigabytes of copyrighted material, books, scientific papers, so forth, all from a website called Library Genesis. But in investigating Library Genesis, from what I've been able to find, anybody can upload information there anonymously. And apparently they don't verify whether or not the content is copyrighted to begin with. So they may be a bigger problem in terms of them becoming a public repository of the pirated material. Is Meta behind that piracy? That's a good question that I can't get answers to. But at this point, from what I've been able to find in searches, Library Genesis is guilty of copyright infringement, and Meta is definitely guilty of copyright infringement. Both companies should be put permanently out of business. Now, for them to put out public domain information, perfectly fine, because it's public domain. But this whole issue evolved or revolves around how Meta trained its AI. And that is, it used somewhere between 81 to 136 terabytes of copyrighted material to train its AI. That's a problem. But it goes well beyond Meta, well beyond LibGen, well beyond Google and their terms of service that 20 years ago everybody gave them permission to use their data however they pleased. That is, however Google pleased. So let's try to break this down and see if we can really get a handle on the problem. First and foremost, Meta should be put out of business. But they're not going to be, because they know that Congress isn't going to write any law against them, because just about every congressman, just about every politician has a stock in Meta. No politician is going to actually write a law that's going to cause them to lose millions of dollars of money. So Meta knows they can get away with this just because of insider trading. Now that's not just the United States. That's anywhere around the world with any politician with investments in Meta. They know the politicians are going to protect their interests. It's power and manipulation all the way. So that is the first major problem that needs to be dealt with. And that is, Meta is not going to be punished for what they did just because of who owns stocks in Meta. It makes the argument that no politician should be allowed to own stocks because of insider trading, and this kind of financial manipulation. But let's look at the bigger issue. And that is Meta training the AI on all of this copyrighted material. Hundreds of thousands of man-hours going into this material to build this AI. It's a problem on a lot of regards. But I need to really break down a few clear terms here in terms of just what we're discussing and the real world implications, because AI is a worthless word. Computers are not intelligent. they don't exhibit any level of understanding. You could take a book, feed it into a computer backwards, and it's going to swear it's right. It doesn't know the difference. And that becomes a bigger problem in the long run because the program is going to be blamed when in fact it is the company behind the program that has committed the crime. So, for the purpose of this discussion, I'm only going to focus on generative text. Generative art is a different set of problems, although they overlap quite a bit. Generative text is basically a giant word library, much like your predictive next word on your keyboard. It measures words and weights. Now that's a very simplified definition, but the point of this is that those words, the context of those paragraphs, mean absolutely nothing to the machine. It has no idea what's being taught in that content, what's being talked about in that content, in the level of reason, the level of what we would understand. So from the standpoint of the program, it's just a bunch of words that a database says this word shows up 35% of the time after this word over here. Therefore, there's a relationship. That's really the whole point of what a large language model does on a very crudely simplistic basis. But when you feed copyright information into that large language model, when somebody talks to it, when it asks it a question, think of it as like a giant dictionary or a encyclopedia. You can ask it a question and it will give you an answer. We used to properly call these knowledge bases because it would just go out, look up the answer, and give you that answer. It's a simple process, really, but when you have it giving out copyrighted information over and over and over that it's stolen from people who have put a lot of work in the material, it becomes a bigger problem. In my own research, I use models that aren't trained on any of the most recent history. And I do that deliberately because I don't want to infringe on anybody's copyright. My research is about language analysis. Does the verb come before or after the subject? How does that work in terms of what I'm trying to do and how I'm transferring the text? For example, summarizing news or breaking down a complex content into a simpler form is about being able to understand, and even that's a bad word, being able to visualize the content in such a way that the transformation rewrites it without losing the concept. And under current laws, both European Union and United States, as long as it's a summary that does not plagiarize the original work, it is permissible by law. But it has to be a summary, meaning the amount of information given is very limited compared to the original. And, this is a big one, and the original source must be attributed. That is, you have to provide a link to the original source. That's critical. Now, if you're using the information internally, such as market sentiment analysis, where the actual content is never even used in the final product, like drawing a chart or something along that lines, it's a whole different set of regulations. I'm focusing only on the ones where the public information being displayed is a transformation of the original content. With that definition in mind, that's not what Meta did. And that's not what Meta is doing with their AI. They are expressly using the information directly, verbatim, that they have scraped. There's no transformative quality to it that I have seen or read about. It is literally giving copyrighted information without attribution to the original artist or to the original publisher. Big problem. Major problem, really. When you are dealing with LibraGen or Library Genesis, you have to understand that this material is not always public. If they went through and policed the work, verified that it wasn't copywritten, or found it in a licensable public database where the royalties were properly paid, then, it's a different story. But at this point, none of that seems to exist. So it becomes very questionable altogether. But let's move to another question. Let's take and play devil's advocate. What if Meta or any other AI company, and it doesn't matter who you talk about here, what if they did want to pay a fair value for the information they used? How would you determine what that fair value is? Given that the information should never outwardly be repeated verbatim, given that the content should be aggregated among hundreds of thousands of other topics, so that the only thing that matters at the end isn't the actual words, but simply a sequence of words. Again, where the context of the material, the educational value, doesn't count. It's not acting in an encyclopedic manner. How do you place a value on that? Is it $5 a book? Is it the full price of the book? Where is that drawing the line? All of the questions and arguments about what the fair value should be for training an AI, they need to be talked about, and nobody's actually getting into that detail. I personally believe AI should only be trained on public domain data. That way there's no question about where it came from. Copyrighted data of any kind should not be allowed. End of story. But let's say facetiously, a company has a resource and they want to properly compensate the authors. How would they do that? Well, back 30 years ago, when I was working on and building knowledge bases for companies, the information that got put into their knowledge base was written by the company's employees. Now, a knowledge base is just a computerized version of an encyclopedia. Natural language processing would take the question, figure it out, and go point to the proper information to be displayed to the user. That's really what is being done in modern AI in a lot of ways. There's a lot of other layers in terms of the data used for word transformation, like being able to translate from Spanish to English or from German to Spanish, like the research I do a lot of. But the general principle is being able to ask a question, how do I bake a cake? And then having a natural language processor go look up in some kind of a data storage to get a recipe of how to bake a cake. Well, now the AI models, large language models, are able to do both in one step. That is, they get the question, and then through the massive amounts of training data, they are able to answer that question. But what is that data actually worth? What is the true value of putting a sentence like "see spot run"? 3 words that have a particular weight within that word. If the model is trained on 300,000 books, and those books have 80% of the time the water is blue as a direct literal sentence, who gets the royalty for 80,000 copies of that basic sentence? That's a question we need to be able to figure out. We need to be able to look at the context of where the data is coming from and how it is transformed. Some companies that deal in data, they will give, for example, 27 cents per megabyte. So for every megabyte of data they sell you, you pay 27 cents. It's a realistic association between price and value, because the data itself can be used appropriate to what you are paying for. Whether it is market sentiment analysis, for example, somebody going through and searching for all 1996 Pontiacs. Well, that data has a price. That price might be 27 cents, it might be 54 cents per 1,000 listings. That's the kind of problem we need to deal with in the market of AI, large language models, the training data itself. Who gets the royalty for the training data? I don't know, because if you have 300,000 books and a sentence structure shows up 54% of the time, do you take that 300,000, figure out that 54%, and then divide that 54% in terms of pennies to every author that had that word phrasing? We would end up in a nightmare when you just deal with our own language and our own talking. How many phrases do we say every day that came out of some writing? What if that was copyrighted? Would we be spending the rest of our lives paying royalties on what we say because of it becoming such a generalized context, a generalized phrase? Let's take something simple. Good morning. Where did that come from? Who coined that phrase? It's become ubiquitous in our language to the point that if we were to have to pay a royalty every time we say it, who do we pay it to? When dealing with generative text and training, that kind of a question seems stupid, but it really is the hallmark of who actually gets paid on aggregated data for a royalty that may or may not exist. Now, this is not an argument against copyright laws. This is a genuine consideration and conversation about how do we even go about understanding the problem. There are dozens of people all over the internet right now up in flaming uproars regarding Library Genesis and Meta and what they've done, which Meta's standpoint is blatant copyright violation. But nobody is talking about the real problem of the training data and where it comes from. What kind of a solution can we really put in place to provide an ethical training model, other than strictly public domain, where nobody gets paid nothing because it's all free? That's the kind of problem we're facing. That's the kind of issue we're dealing with. How do we split those hairs? Because somebody at one time or another coined a phrase that's become popular culture and spread everywhere. We can't go around spending the rest of eternity suing each other for copyright infringement because of something we said that's become ubiquitous in our culture, or ubiquitous in somebody else's culture that got migrated and translated. We have a lot of problems to address, and quite honestly, we don't have any answers. And it's only worse when politicians have money invested in companies that are breaking the laws. It's worse when there's no clear roadmap to the legal system versus technology that's growing at such an exponential rate that it's impossible to try to figure out how to even write laws for new technology. I don't know, really. I don't have the answers to many of these questions. I wish I did. I could sell them and probably get rich off of that. But realistically, a lot of these questions aren't just technological questions. They're human questions. What's to stop somebody from sticking a camera on a rolling platform, going out into the world, and just having it record data? That's public domain, isn't it? Could an AI company take that information and use it however way they want if they are the ones recording it? I don't know. Again, more questions. And the rationality behind this is me going into a bookstore. I pick up a book, I open it, and I read a few pages to find out if I want to buy the book. Well, I close the book and I put the book back. I put the book back on the shelf. Do I owe the author of that book a royalty for the pages I've read? How many times have we done that in our lives? Or we'll go down the side of the street and we'll see a newspaper in the stand and we'll read the headline, but then go about our business. Do we owe that newspaper a royalty for reading that headline? Next question. How do you even enforce something like this legitimately? We are already within a situation where society has eroded so many rights, so many fundamental values of our freedoms, that going to this level seems even more tyrannistic and totalitarian than some of the worst apocalyptic movies we have on record. But it's these problems that we need to really address. It's these problems that become part of the framework of a legal system that is vastly and horrifyingly not able to deal with it. So let me know what you think. Share your thoughts about Library Genesis, about Meta, about the whole problem of what they did, pirating information. How do we move forward in a way that is ethical, where proper and legal companies have a framework to follow, where they can function legally and not break the law? How do we even go through the process of determining what that framework is? Let me know. Let me know what you think about this entire situation. I'm interested in hearing. Thank you for watching. Until next time.